Hi, I'm Brian Donovan from the Hudson Republican Committee, and tonight joining me is Ed Naile from the Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers. Ed, thank you for joining us, and welcome to Hudson. We're going to start off by looking at a recent YouTube video that Project Veritas put together. Ed, I know you're very familiar with it. It actually is a 10-minute video. We have a quick, the first 60 seconds of it, basically. We're going to start there and go from there. So let's take a look at that video.
If a person walked in to vote in the 2012 New Hampshire presidential primary and said the names of multiple dead people...
Hello. Do you have a Reynolds Karen on your list, please?
Karen?
Do you have a Roger Grew? Do you have Paul Susie?
Do you have a Thomas McCarran?
Hello there. Do you have Joseph Boucher?
Could he receive a ballot to vote without showing any ID?
And right. Democratic ballot. There you go, Mr.
No.
Democratic ballot. There you are.
Take that.
Take one of these chips, go over to the round table behind me, and they'll give you a ballot.
I don't have my ID on me. I don't need...
No.
Oh, I left my ID in the car.
You don't need it.
Do you know if there are any other dead people on the list, or just checking to make sure they're on it?
It says that you voted. How would I know if they were dead or not?
Okay.
How would I know if they were dead or not?
Okay.
As we saw that, Ed, you know, a lot of people here in New Hampshire, including the Secretary of State, say that voter fraud is non-existent in our state. What does the video that we just saw indicate to you as far as the potential for voter fraud here?
Well, it's wide open. The Project Veritas people just got a checklist, and they have a list of people who died recently in the area, matched it up, and walked up to a polling place and said, do you have this person's name on your checklist? And the supervisors of the checklist, ballot clerks, whatever, looked down and said yes, and attempted to hand them a ballot. And they said, no, let me show some ID, and, you know, and didn't accept the ballots. They didn't engage in voter fraud, but they did engage in what I would call journalism. They really showed how loose our election laws are.
That's journalism.
It's embarrassing is what it was.
Right. And I know as a president of the Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers, obviously you're involved with a wide range of topics, but voter fraud happens to be one that you're really focused on. So how long have you been researching the topic here in New Hampshire, and what other type of cases have you seen?
Well, we got involved in 2000 because we'd heard so much about it, and 2000 happened to have been one of the 10-year period where they purged the voter rolls. So anytime you're involved in a purging of the rolls statewide, I think we just took off 160,000 names in a recent 2011 purge. A lot of stuff comes through your door, so it was just by accident we happened to do that. And about 6 or 7 of us sat down in our office in Concord and went through this and said, all right, we're going to start collecting data, evidence, whatever we can to track voter fraud, and we've been at it ever since. I'd say we have a pretty comprehensive collection of election law violations and voter fraud. And myself, it happened to me in 1993 when I ran for selectman.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about what happened to you.
I ran for selectman in my small town of maybe at the time 1,800, 1,700, 1,800 people, and put my dollar down, put my name on it, was on the ballot, and as people were going in to vote, and there's maybe 400, 500 voters total at the time, the supervisor of the checklist told people not to vote for me. She said I was a liar, she knew me personally, and not to vote for me, and she had my opponent's pin on. So as people went by, some were shocked, others, okay, fine. And she was reported to the moderator. The town moderator at the time was a guy named Chuck Gades, and he reported her to the Attorney General's office, and she did it again at the Cooperative School District election. And the moderator there, Russell Galpin, who's currently a selectman in Hillsborough, where the school's located, he turned her into the AG's office. And they wrote her a letter on Attorney General's office letterhead that said, don't do it again. Basically. So I knew from that point on there was no enforcement. I mean, if you can't find anything more egregious than that, and she was reelected overwhelmingly the next year for another 2 or 3 year term.
Right. We have a couple things that you had passed out at a recent workshop that we attended, and we're actually going to show that as part of our program here. You've got what you call the Deerfield Dozen. What's that documentation showing?
In 2000, when they purged the rolls in Deerfield, 23 letters came back from 23 people who voted from 159 Bear Brook Road. There is no Bear Brook Road in Deerfield. So They had a make-believe road. They had a make-believe address on that road, and 23 people walked in and registered and voted same day, and no one stopped them. They just, like they were normal residents, and nobody recognized, apparently, that there was no such road. I mean, most of the people that are involved in a town's elections know the roads in their town, and there is no Bear Brook Road.
Right.
So that came back to us, and we said, oh, now we have a good collection of 23 names. So we reversed, did a little research into that, and we went and got all the same-day voter registration cards. And back in 2000, 2001, the same-day voter registration cards contained a signature of the same-day voter, where they came from, their place of origin, where they last voted. So we could track who they were, where they came from. We had a signature, and all that's gone now. They changed the laws in about 2006, and a same-day voter registration card has almost no information of any use for investigating voter fraud. That's where we stand right now.
How about the what you call the lump at the dump? What's the story with that?
Yeah, in 2003, CNHT was involved with a local taxpayers group in Bedford. And Bedford, there was a group in Bedford that wanted to build a new school and take the kids from Manchester, where they were tuitioned for about $9,000 a year, and move them into their own school, which is, it's going to be $18.20, which I think it's panned out to be. And they were told that it would only cost 30 cents on the dollar. So we were kind of chuckling about that, and we said, yeah, we'll help you out and try and stop this. Well, they would lose at a regular election and then have a special election. And during a special election, if you're trying to raise funds at a special election and you don't have approval from the court, 50% of the voters have to show up, or it's not legal. So we had a campaign. We thought, hey, why don't we just have a campaign of having people not vote? And they will never make the 50% mark, and we don't have to go to court. We'll win by default. So when we did that, the school district clerk decided he needed to turn out the vote. So he set up a card table at the dump, and he had the checklist and a stack of absentee ballots, and he was handing them out to people as they came in, and he put up a sign that said, "Vote here today, 9 to 3." That's a clear violation of dozens of election laws, because a polling place has to be a specific polling place, has to be legitimate, it has to be advertised in the papers, and the main thing is that in school elections, according to state statute, absentee ballots for a school election are handled by the town clerk from the town clerk's office. So they're under control, not at the dump. So he was turned into the Attorney General's office, and the AG's office wrote a letter on their stationery, and it said that it was highly irregular but not illegal. So we call him the lump at the dump. And we won that one, but eventually that school passed during a snowstorm. There was a pretty severe snowstorm, and they did not cancel the meeting, and their crowd turned out and they got their school. And it's a bit more than 30 cents on the dollar.
Right. Well, those are kind of both instances, I would say, of unusual activity. The third one that we have here, which actually is a legal document, we refer to it as the Mammoth Road document. That's a little bit different story, because there you've got somebody that's not, somebody that's, an amateur at it.
Right.
Sounds a little bit different.
Yeah, what we had in 2005, 2006 election in Manchester, 2005 I think it was, there was upcoming presidential candidates were coming to New Hampshire and looking for friends. And there was an election for Mayor Baines of Manchester. And Mayor Baines got some help from a national candidate, and he had a professional campaigner named Jeff Witrowski come to New Hampshire from South Dakota. He had South Dakota plates on his car, South Dakota driver's license, and he was doing what most of these guys do, helping them out, with more of a professional effort for this mayor's campaign. But he got involved in stealing signs from the Frank Ginta campaign and from the Republican Party. And he was chased to where he was staying, which was the home of Kathy Sullivan, the Democrat Party chairman at the time, on South Mammoth Road. So he used her address as his address for voting. He actually voted here in the election before he left. So he registered same day with some sort of ID from South Dakota, I imagine. He got caught stealing signs. The police came to the Sullivan home, made him open the trunk, and there was no prosecution. The Republican Party made a complaint to the Attorney General and the Secretary of State.
Really the document.
And nothing, no follow through. If you can't arrest somebody, charge somebody for that, this is a professional campaigner.
Right.
He goes state to state to state. Right. He knows the law.
Right.
And
this isn't a college kid that's being rounded up for
so
getting on a bus.
He was getting paid to come here, and that's what happens. A lot of these guys that come from out of state and they come with candidates, and we have dozens of people run for president and dozens of people run for other offices. Right. They have these people come in from out of state and they just take advantage of the situation and go. I don't like it when someone steals my vote, and that was a clear case of being caught. He told the police who he was sorry for it, and he said he was going back to South Dakota to leave him alone, and he pretty much packed up and left. The Manchester police didn't prosecute, and neither did the Attorney General's office.
Well, I can tell you from personal experience, and I really noticed this in the 2008 primary that we had here, Hudson being so close. We were right on the border with Massachusetts, but it's amazing. I remember going into our community center to vote, and seeing the license plates that's in the parking lot. You have Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey.
Yeah.
So to me, yes, people could be moving in. There's a lot of people moving to the area and so forth. But I really have to wonder when you see that type of activity.
Well, a lot of them are runners. They're going to get the results and take them back to headquarters so the candidates know quickly who won. Sometimes there's lawyers that are observing the election. They're from out of state. And Massachusetts, really, there's not much in the way of competition down there, so we're prime for them to come up here and campaign in New Hampshire where it actually counts. I've actually campaigned for candidates and had the guy standing next to me bragging that the sign he had was paid for by Tom Finneran. And he asked me if I knew who Tom Finneran was. This was in Goffstown by the Bartlett School. And I said, yeah, I know who he is. And he's a House Majority Leader, I guess at the time, Speaker of the House in Massachusetts, who was found guilty of rigging, redistricting to keep minorities from having any power in a certain district. Right. So that's the kind of people who come here to campaign. These are union people who are not working, and that's who sends them up, and they're paid for by out-of-state money. So but we lure them in, and we have very lax laws. So.
Sure. Well, who's responsible for prosecuting cases of voter fraud in New Hampshire, and how many cases have been brought in the last recent years?
Well, the Attorney General's office, it's like RSA 7. It's at the top of the list of RSAs. They're responsible for prosecuting, and they just plain do not do it that I know of. We've collected a lot of incidents of flagrant election law violations and voter fraud, and I know of none that have been arrested other than before we started. There was a 16-year-old young man in Londonderry voted at the school where he was going to school. The election was there. The actual voting was held in school, and I think he got in line and voted on his father's name. He was a junior, let's say. I've never talked to him, but I know that did happen. And there was a guy named Cropsey who lived in Tilton, New Hampshire, but he voted in Plymouth where his business was. I guess he's in town in Plymouth. He thought, I'll just vote here. It's quicker. It's easier. And he was prosecuted and charged $800. I haven't talked to him yet. I've been trying to contact him, but I imagine he would not be very happy that we have people from all over this state of New Hampshire voting anywhere they please, and he was arrested and convicted of it. And this young man, 16-year-old, I think Jeff Witrowski should have been prosecuted, and the 16-year-old should have been sat down and told that's against the law.
Sure.
It's a 16-year-old kid.
Well, one of the things that we're actually showing in our program here is the document that came from the I guess it was the Secretary of State office in 2006, and we're going to show the link to that document. So if anybody that's watching the program here wants to see it for themselves. Now there were some particular things in 2006 that you would have thought would have made that type of report. And the report is actually the 2006 General Election Voter Fraud Report and Investigation. Can you tell us what was in that and what was not in that report?
Well, pretty much some election officials had people come in and register to vote same day from Hanover, a couple different towns, and the officials there noticed that they didn't have proper identification of who they were, or what they had was scant. So they reported the name, and the AG's office sent a letter or tried to contact them at that home and got no response. So they eventually tracked down the individual and interviewed them. And in every single case, there's maybe 5 cases, they said, well, it was just a glitch. They had left the paperwork at home, or the post office didn't deliver something. It was just a mail problem. But in 2006, we had a state representative named Chuck Weed from Keene, who urged at least 6 students in Keene to use same-day voter registration forms that he manufactured himself, or he had them, and they didn't have a perjury clause on them. So he claims to have been protesting the fact that it was a perjury clause on a same-day voter affidavit. So the Attorney General's office sent a gentleman that used to be in charge of that, Bud Fitch, out to Keene to investigate that. I didn't find that in there.
Right.
So we have that, and a couple other things. Oh, well, you would think that the investigation with Jeff Wachowski would have wound up in there. There's a number of things that happened in 2006, and if you look on the Secretary of State's website where they list these, it's 2006 up to 2010, and nothing we've been involved with in any of those years has wound up on that investigation.
Right.
So we're wondering, most people say, oh, there's no confirmed case of voter fraud in the state of New Hampshire. Well, if you were to read the Secretary of State's website, that's what you would think. But our evidence shows different.
Right. And actually, I took a look at that 2006 document, and if you read it, it talks about the fact that I think something like 25,000 new registrations, new voters were registered for that election.
Same day.
Yep, and 102 which did not show voter ID. So it sounds like what they do is then they have a process where they send out a piece of mail to their address and see what comes back. 3 of them came back. So I guess what's happened here, we're going to let the U.S. Post Office trigger the investigation, because that's exactly what happened.
Yep.
Three pieces of mail came back, returned to sender, and that's what's actually in the document. And then they contacted those people, and basically there really was no follow-through, no punishment involved at all.
No, in this case, it was probably just a lax paperwork or whatever. But in that same time period, we had a gentleman, a former city councilor from Dover named Dave Scott, and he sent cards out to the people who voted, and he got dozens of them back and reported them to the Attorney General's office. That isn't mentioned in there. And he had a lot of names. These people just voted, they gave an address, and a couple weeks later, they're not found at that address. So we know of no, if they did investigate it, they certainly didn't put it with the rest of the investigations they did. So that's consistent. It's a consistently inconsistent in their enforcement of election laws. So I mean, if a state representative who's actually on the election law committee, you would think would be smart enough not to make his own homemade voter documents and hand them out to students and say, go ahead and vote. I mean, you're urging someone who really doesn't know our laws to do something which is illegal.
Well, if it does not contain an affidavit, which is the whole point of that document, isn't, I would think.
Yeah, well, you're swearing an oath that you are who you are, and that the information that the bill for electric service from public service or some document you have, maybe a rent receipt, is actually you. Right. That's pretty lax.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Now, your group gets involved with supporting people that want to secure the integrity of the election process. There was a case in Henniker that you mentioned recently. How was your group involved with that, and tell us some of the details of that particular case?
That was back 1999, something like that. There was a vote for a $1.25 million construction bond in the school district that serves Henniker and Ware. And during that election, the moderator, an attorney, a local attorney, as a lot of them are, closed the door, said I'm now closing the polls. And there were 6 people still inside the town hall. Now, I've been around long enough that if you're inside the town hall when they close the doors, you are in line to vote. You're allowed to vote. So they were told they couldn't vote. And they put up a ruckus, and they said, we're in the town hall waiting to vote when you close the doors. So the moderator let them vote, but he put the ballots in his pocket. 6 people. So he has the ballots in his pocket, and the bond passed by 6 votes. So one of the guys from Ware came to us, a resident of Ware, has a couple kids in the school, and said, can you help us out? And I said, yeah, we taught him how to present his own case. So we drafted a case to Superior Court. We took the case in and basically asked this attorney dozens of questions, like, are you aware of this statute, 6 whatever it is, regarding the moderator's obligation to personally put the ballots in the box? Yes. Did you do that? No. Are you aware of that? And we just went through the list of laws and basically had him admit that he was aware of the law and say, yes, it didn't happen. And Judge Conboy overturned the election. So we overturned a $1.25 million schools bond with a pro se, no lawyer involved case. And that's an election violation or voter fraud. I mean, it's what it is. So those 6 people, got an opportunity to vote again, and that bond was voted down overwhelmingly when the general public found out what happened. And most people don't like voter fraud. They don't like a hint of it. They don't like loose laws. They want their vote to count. And when you let people from other states vote here, everyone that votes is taking a vote from a legitimate citizen.
Right, right. Other states, or in that case, somebody that's basically rigging the system.
Yeah.
For whatever reason.
Oh, we have accidents, things that happen that are just hard to imagine. Sample ballots go through a machine to check the machine to see if it's working properly. Somebody puts the sample ballots down, and an hour later, they get thrown through as though they were voters. And that's just an accident. It happens. But this happened up in Gilmanton. 30 ballots that were just for testing went through the machine and got lost in there. So you don't know how many of them were what. They just ran them through to basically clean the machine up and then set it back to zero. But there you go. And things like that you can understand. But putting 6 ballots in your pocket when you're an attorney and you're the moderator, and I keep trying to explain to people, when you see someone on the election law committee try and come up with homemade same-day voter affidavits, who's on the election law committee, he represents you, or a lawyer who's the moderator keeps ballots in his pocket. That's the same person that's supposed to be watching these elections to make sure they're fair. The whole system is tainted at that juncture. Right. So that's what we're trying to stop and bring awareness to it. And the Secretary of State's office and the AG's office is not doing the state of New Hampshire a service by denying that there's voter fraud, because you see people everywhere say there's never been a confirmed case. I beg to differ.
Right, right.
And we have more. We're always looking for it. And we always urge people to contact the Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers. If you go in, like we know a woman from Bedford whose husband was deceased, went in to vote, his name wasn't off the checklist, but his name was checked off. Mm-hmm. Now, at first they think it's an accident, but once they've talked to us, and you find that town after town, you start to get suspicious.
Right. So if anybody does want to check out your organization, what's the website? What's the best way for folks to get involved?
Just cnht.org. Okay. And our webmaster will get a hold of you and give you to us, and we'll be in contact. If you have some information regarding voter fraud, something's happened to you, or you have a question, we'd be glad to work with you and check it out. Okay. That's where we come up with this stuff, and I don't think we've found everything. We're not that lucky. We're not that. It's cost a lot of money too to track these things down, to send cards out. Sure. Also in 2006, I was a poll watcher in Ward 3 in Manchester. I caught 3 non-residents voting there. They had voted during the primary. We sent them cards. The cards came back, and they came in to vote. And I said, "Excuse me, I have a card here that says you're not at that address." And they just tried to leave, tried to walk out of the polling place. I had to have the moderator catch them, and they had to swear out, show some ID to the moderator, not to me, and sign some document and leave. So that's not in the Attorney General's office.
Yeah, that's definitely not in the Attorney General.
But I was there with another gentleman. I think he caught 3 as well. And I have at least one of the names with me in my briefcase, carried around all the time. I went back to that property and sat across the road in my car for days trying to see somebody come in and out of that property. And I believe it's a campaign worker that was here and just used an address. Mm-hmm. I also, when I was a poll watcher, I saw people come in that were homeless. There's homeless shelters in Manchester, and I would never challenge a homeless person. You can pretty much tell who they are, and the address gives you an idea. You find out where the homeless shelters are, and you say when somebody comes through with that address, you don't challenge them. But if you have evidence to believe that someone is not who they are, or they're voting from a non-existent address, your right to challenge is equal to your right to vote.
Right. Well, everybody has a right to vote, and if they're homeless or they're not, whatever, a homeless person has the right to vote. But the thing is, when somebody is deliberately, gaming the system.
Professionals.
Right. Yep. And as that Project Veritas video shows, they weren't asking. All they were doing was asking.
Is the name on the list? Yeah.
Is the name on the list?
Yep.
And obviously, people know how it works. And
yes, they do.
And they know how easy it is to do that, and that's a couple of cases of that. So. Ed, What do you think is wrong with the New Hampshire election law?
The laws seem to be fine, but it's a lack of enforcement and the various ways you interpret it, depending on the case. You know, we had a guy run for the Senate who voted in Connecticut as a college student, so he didn't meet a 7-year requirement, so he was not allowed to run for Senate. We had a person that voted in New York and moved to New Hampshire and didn't live here 2 years. She won a House seat and she was allowed to keep her House seat. She didn't have the 2-year requirement. So in one case, you can't run for the Senate because you weren't here for 7 years, you voted somewhere else. But in a House seat, that's fine, no problem. So
Yeah.
Representative from Jaffrey.
Inconsistency.
Yeah, it's always inconsistent, you know.
Now, there was a situation in Bedford you talked about before regarding some signs.
Yeah,
What was
during that vote on the bond, we put some signs up, and we were working with a group called Citizens for a Sound Economy. They paid for signs, and it was, if you want more information on the school bond, listen to our radio program, which we had in the area at the time. And the town took our signs down and tried to charge us $100 a piece, a $10,000 fine for having signs, illegal signs. Well, political signs are exempt. And the town of Bedford's zoning ordinance said they were using the definition, the Attorney General's office and the Secretary of State's office definition of political signs. So I took the sign to the Attorney General's office and said, why is this not a political sign? Why is Citizens for a Sound Economy being hit with a $10,000 fine? There's signs all over Bedford. And he said, well, you know, we don't take an issue in that. Bedford's using your description. Well, you know, the sign is from Citizens for a Sound Economy. It's a 501c4. It's a political sign for a political purpose by a political organization. And they cut the fine down to $5,000, and Citizens for a Sound Economy paid for it. And that AG could have picked up the phone. The Secretary of State could have called Bedford and say, look, if you continue with this, we'll testify on behalf of the taxpayer group that it were political signs. Why would we put up a sign? Right. But I actually asked the guy in charge at the AG's office, what kind of signs are they? Is it a real estate sign? Is it a house for sale? I don't know. No answer for you.
Wow.
That's the way we're treated, and that's until you see that up close and personal, you think New Hampshire has no problems. But the more you're around it, it's not going away. Project Veritas really opened up a can of worms, and it's not going to go away.
Right.
It's going to have to be fixed.
Right. Well, you know, one of the things we were talking about before, I just want to show something. You know, I wanted to ask you, how does New Hampshire compare to other states as far as prosecuting these type of voter infractions? And here's a book, a very thick book. Tell us what this book represents.
It's a nonprofit organization, the American Voter Rights, whatever the name of it is.
American Center for Voting Rights.
Voter Rights.
2005.
And they compiled everything they could in the United States in 2004 for election campaign violations and whatnot. And there's a bunch of states are mentioned in there. They have testimony from court cases, they have witnesses, they have confessions, and these people are prosecuted in other states. When the same thing happened in another state, you'd be prosecuted.
Yeah. So this actually represents 1 year.
1 year, and it is comprehensive. It is a lot of work. I'd love to be able to put our stuff
Right.
in a book like that. It's a fascinating read.
Right. Yeah, the difference here is people being prosecuted.
Yeah, and you can look that up. I mean, they have a website. You can look it up, and there's stuff like that.
We can add that
Yeah.
to our link as well. So there are other states that take it a lot more serious. How about like Massachusetts, Vermont, Maine, right around us, our neighbors?
I'm not familiar with specific cases, but I know that they do. You know, if they catch you voting in a wrong town in other states, you get fined or a warning or something. But they do arrest people for campaign violations, and a lot of it's professionals that work for a city that don't live in the city but want to vote there. A lot of that happens, and they'll get prosecuted. People turn them in. Up in Maine, in Kittery, every so often the police in Kittery go around and take all the New Hampshire plates off the Maine cars. And eventually I'm going to grab a hold of that list. Because if they're coming to New Hampshire to register their cars, I have a sneaky suspicion that they're coming here to vote as well. They're already listed in the town, you know, as having the car plate there. So, but in other states, they take that seriously. New Hampshire isn't doing that I know of.
Right. Now, what changes, are there changes that you advocate for as far as the law is concerned?
Yeah, there's a bill in right now that Senator Russ Prescott put in. I think the Senate voted on that the other day. And I don't know, it takes effect in 2016. I don't really, you know, new legislation I'm not really that in favor of. I think we get rid of same-day voter registration and go with motor voter like the other states have. I don't think same-day registration has served us well at all.
Yeah, that is unique for New Hampshire, correct?
Yeah. I found a letter from the Secretary of State from 2000, 8 that said the same-day registration had less chance of voter fraud in it because you only registered at one place. Well, obviously you could register anywhere and you can go vote anywhere. You just say the name. We just need to get away from the same-day registration where it's a madhouse on that particular day, and people are herded up like the people that voted in Deerfield were herded onto a bus because they worked for this nonprofit, and they went to Deerfield and they voted from a non-existent location on a non-existent road. And I don't think they would have done that if we'd have had a regular election system where you have a cutoff period 20 or 30 days before.
You know, I think a lot of people out there, take a lot of pride in voting. You know, it's a civic duty.
Yeah.
It means something to people, and there's a lot of people also that feel that they play by the rules. You know, they pay their taxes, they do the right thing, and try to teach the kids to take responsibilities, for their actions and so forth. So I think a lot of people, when you look at some of the things that we're talking about, are going to be, very upset about that. People that are watching that might be looking at what we're talking about and saying, they want to get involved and do something. What would you say? What can people do to get involved and try to correct this situation?
Well, the Secretary of State's office has free handbooks with all the election laws in them. And they sound complicated until if you read them and digest a few, and once you know a couple, it's easy for the rest to fall in place. I'd definitely get a copy of the handbook of election laws, and then talk to somebody else who's run for office if that's what you're going to do, and make yourself aware of the polling place and what's going to happen when you go in. I go as a poll watcher at various places, and some of the places are absolutely welcoming. Come on over here, have some cookies and coffee. They introduce you. Other places are absolutely suspicious. And we have moderators in the state that think that their rules are law, and they're not. I am as much as a poll watcher or a challenger, I'm as much a part of your election as the curtains on the booth. You have to let me in, and that's been a problem.
Right. And as you said before, if somebody sees something when they're voting or suspicious activity, they can contact your website and contact you folks and let you know and at least pass the information along.
And never challenge anybody without a good reason. You contact us, but if you have suspicions, get some evidence. Get names, ask for copies of things, get a witness, write something down. That's good for, in a court case later on. Write down your observations at that point in time. Contact the moderator if you think something's happening, because a moderator has the right to ask a person, who they are or why they're doing something. And a lot of it is just common sense, but we are taken advantage of here in the state, and it's up to citizens to correct that because we can't really count on the people that are supposed to be doing it.
Right, right. Now, up until now, we've really been talking about the state of New Hampshire, and I did a little research on the topic using a magazine, and we're going to actually show the cover of this. It's a Whistleblower magazine that comes from WorldNet Daily. I think you and I talked about that. It's a great magazine. It's an investigative reporting, the way it used to be done, basically. And so if anybody, when I looked at that, and I think if anybody else checks into it, and they can, obviously there's other sources. I'm not saying that's the only thing to take a look at. Go out and investigate on the web. But I know when I was digging into that and going through it, I really see that there's a pattern, a bigger pattern that might be developing here. And actually, one of the next slides that we're going to show, based on that magazine, WorldNet Daily, and like I said, people can look at that, they can get that magazine. You can actually view a lot of it online. If you wanted to go and purchase the magazine, you can do that. We show that information, the website that's going to be on here. But there are some things that folks are doing on a national level that I don't think really bode well going forward. One of those things I would say, universal voter registration, which, sounds great. I guess the concept is, why limit people to have to go into the town office to register? Let's take all the databases that are out there, DMV, food stamps, whatever, Obama healthcare, that would be another thing that would be prime for it. Put it in a database and let all those people vote without basically any type of oversight. There's no status of citizenship that's planned in this, okay? Felonies, you're not supposed to, they, I believe, do not have the right to vote.
Depending on states.
Okay, so it depends on state. So what's your take on this movement towards universal voter registration?
Well, it's a unilateral movement to steal elections is what that is. I mean, you have an obligation as a citizen to serve on a jury, to register your car. They don't come to your house and register your car for you. You go do that yourself. You're a citizen, and it's just it's fraught with mischief. Let's put it that way. And it's very expensive to hold an election again. Think about the people that run for office. You put your heart and soul, everything you own. Sometimes people take out loans to run for office, and find out that when you do a mailing, a lot of the mail comes back as those people don't really live there, or people from another town or city or state have voted against you. It's just not a way to do things. People will lose faith in the system, and you'll have trouble.
Well, that's a good point, because what it's really doing is it takes the personal responsibility from the individual off, gives it to the government, and say, if you've got my name, throw it in the system, basically.
I just served on a jury in January and February, and when I went in to serve on a jury, I had to show my driver's license.
Right.
Well, your jury duty is just like voting. You know, it's an obligation.
Well, try getting on a plane without a driver's license. It's not going to happen.
Work.
Now, another thing that they mentioned, and this to me I thought was really kind of very scary. There's a project out there. It's actually a 527 organization called Secretary of State Project, and it's funded by George Soros, that you're probably familiar with. So, you know, this kind of reminds me of that
They wanted to get as many of their Secretary of States in office as they possibly could. It worked very well for them in Minnesota.
Exactly.
I believe, yeah.
That's
because those rulings, you know, your ruling of the Secretary of State, you have to go up against them in court if you don't like the ruling. So having the person in charge on your side rather than impartial is very important if you want to toss an election.
Yep. Well, they target specific states. Minnesota, Michigan, Ohio, I think Nevada is another one that they target. So the game plan is, you know, kind of like that famous Joseph Stalin quote, the people that cast the votes decide nothing, the people that count the votes decide everything. That's exactly what they're trying to do, and there's millions of dollars behind that effort. You know, Acorn, I don't even know if we have to say anything about Acorn. I mean, everybody...
they've been discredited completely and totally.
Right. The U.S. Department of Justice with Eric Holder, just another...
I think the Black Panthers in Philadelphia with the bats in front of the polling place. I mean, Philadelphia is loaded with voter fraud. They have, I think, well over 100,000 people that vote there that can't possibly live there because of their demographics. You can just go on the internet and check that yourself. So either they're handing each person that votes in certain areas 3 or 4 ballots, or they're stuffing the ballot box later on. But there's not enough people in Philadelphia to turn out the votes that they do, and that controls the rest of the state.
Yeah. Well, Pennsylvania obviously is a critical state.
Yeah.
You've got 2 big cities.
Ohio.
You've got Pittsburgh and in Philadelphia. Now, my family, my parents were born in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is a rock solid Democrat area.
So is Philly.
Yeah, Philly is
and all the counties around it.
Yeah. So you're going to have a high turnout in that area no matter what. But when they're stuffing the boxes, that's a little bit different. Another thing that they mentioned in the Whistleblower magazine is a couple things actually. Cloward and Piven is something, I don't know if you're familiar with that. 2 Columbia professors, happens to be by chance President Obama spent some time at Columbia University. Basically pushing a system to undermine the American free enterprise system, our rule of law and so forth by overspending and class warfare.
It's a collapse the system theory.
Right, from within, basically.
And distrust the electorate. That's part of it.
Right. And another classic type of thing as far as voter turnout is the Obama stimulus of $789 billion back in 2009, where the White House claimed at that point that 3.5 million jobs would be created out of that effort, and 90% of them would be in the private sector, which obviously is a total crock. The other thing that they are starting to see right now, and actually they mention it in this magazine, is that I think there were 2 studies that are studying the spending of that money, the stimulus money.
Yeah, where it goes.
And what a surprise here, twice the amount of money is in Democrat districts versus Republican districts. Actually, from a percentage point of view, 73% is going to the Democrat districts.
Well, it's a typical Chicago to the victor goes the spoils system on a national level that we've never seen before.
Well, actually, historically this has happened before, and both parties, I'm sure, are doing it. But the
this
Democrats,
is $1 trillion problem.
Well, that's for sure. If you do any checking of the FDR, the fact that he won 4 presidential elections, that should tell you one thing. But a lot of that money that they spent was basically buying votes in Pennsylvania. So not much has changed as far as that's concerned. So I guess the point of this article, and again, people can read it, decide what they think on their own. But on a national level, I think there's some things that you look at and you say, is there an attempt to manipulate the system to basically almost guarantee power for a one-party system going forward?
Yeah, and we should be part of that. New Hampshire is the first primary in the nation. We should have a clean system that people can have faith in, and I don't think we have that right now. And the Project Veritas people exposed it, and that's not going to stop. It's going to continue, and it's going to take citizens to stand up and say, okay, enough. I don't want to hear this. There is no voter fraud in New Hampshire ever again. And when you see something like this, or you're reading something about voter fraud, ask to see details, ask for the statutes. We happily provide statutes, letters, documentation on all the voter fraud we've found, and we'll do it anywhere, anytime. And we're constantly trying to pick up new stuff, and we have new stuff. Mm-hmm. But you have to say, okay, if I don't do it now, I won't have it left. There'll be nothing left. And when people don't trust the way their officials are elected, a lot of unhappy campers out there, and that's not what we want. We want a sound electoral system that works and people can have faith in. The election's over, the next day we all shake hands and go about our business. Right. But a lot of sour stomachs when you've been cheated in an election. That you remember that? I know it happened to me in '93. I haven't forgotten it. Mm-hmm. So that's why I'm doing this.
Well, when you look at a report like that 2006 report that we were talking about before, and you don't see things that you would expect, to me that's a real red flag. It's one thing if you lose the election, okay, you're not happy about it, and you look at some of the information that's in there, at least they report it. Maybe they interpret the law different than we want to be interpreted, but that's fine. But in those cases where it's not even in that report, that really, to me, is a red flag that we have to be careful of. Now, one thing I do want to also say, and we're going to actually put a slide up so that everyone can see that. You're going to be our guest speaker at the May
23rd.
May 23rd. That's the meeting of it's our monthly meeting for the Hudson Republican Committee. We're going to do that like your workshop that you did recently in Portsmouth.
Portsmouth that we were both at. Yeah, that was great.
So there's going to be a lot more detail. There's going to be handouts. So anybody, actually, any Hudson Republican or Republican in the surrounding towns wants to come, you're invited to do that. That's May 23rd. The time's 7 o'clock. It's at the Rogers Library here in Hudson. So we're looking forward to that, Ed. And we just talked about the one that you did this past Monday. It was March 5th in Portsmouth. Rick Lavasser and myself from the Hudson Republican Committee went there. We recorded that. That was a really interesting event.
Yeah.
Pretty typical for a lot of these things?
That was not typical. Normally, I've done them all over the state, and I've done them for years. And usually get a pretty warm reception and usually get a crowd. I've been light at our office. We did some of these in the office, and not many people came. There were both weather conditions. But this time, I expected a lot more people to show up. But what showed up was Portsmouth election officials, as though I was accusing them of something. They were not happy that I was there. And I don't think they expected to see voter fraud on display like it was. They were not comfortable for the first half of it. And eventually one of them had to stand up and come up and try and take over the microphone. She'd seen enough, Right. If you believe there's no voter fraud in New Hampshire, then don't come to these things. Just stay home and put your thumbs in your ears and your hands over your eyes and say there is none. That's what they should have done. But they were not very happy that I was there. And I was handing them, as I do at all the workshops, I was handing them documented cases of voter fraud. You can take it home with you. So there you go. And they were not happy about it, and they kind of spoiled the meeting. I may go back there and do one on my own without the Republican Party, just do it on my own.
Well, I can see, from a human nature point of view, they take it personal. I think that's an aspect of it as well, whether they, agreed with everything or not. The other thing I noticed that there was a lot of issues of semantics. Is that voter fraud?
Word games. Yes.
Well, that's another thing. Now, so I mean, they're not mind readers, obviously. That's not what they're there to do. But there's certainly, I think, there's no doubt that the system, has its frailties, and it can easily be gamed. The other thing that I thought was very interesting, we talked about the voter ID bill that was introduced last year, did not make it. Hopefully, it's going to be
vetoed.
Got vetoed. We were not able to override that. Hopefully they're going to be doing that again. And there was a gentleman that was up front. I think he was maybe an Indian gentleman.
From Pakistan.
Pakistan, right. And he had an interesting point. He had mentioned the fact that his parents, who lived back home, and what he called a third world country, basically, they have to show their ID, you know, when they vote. And I don't know if you caught this, but there was a gentleman in the back that happened to just say kind of a really ridiculous statement about voter suppression, that the voter ID bill that the Republicans have submitted was really, you know, voter suppression. So that kind of made me actually do a little research. And I've got a book here. Actually, I'll give it to you at the end of the show here. And it's called The American History in Black and White. It's by an author, David Barton, who I think you're very familiar with. So I looked at that book, and we're actually going to donate a copy of that book to our library here in Hudson because it's an outstanding book. And as far as voter suppression is concerned, you know, we're going to show a slide here with a little bit of details. But actually, the Southern Democrats implemented whole sorts of things to suppress the voter turnout: poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, election procedure, Jim Crow laws, which most people know.
Generational.
Yeah,
for a long time.
Exactly. Gerrymandering, you know, you can kind of read that. There's about 9 or 10 different things that are there. Very successful. The book happens to say in some cases, like for example, the state of Mississippi, where at a point in the around the 1900s, the blacks had about 80,000 or 80,000 more black folks in that state than whites, but yet the vote was 8-1 white versus black. So as far as voter suppression, I think the Democrats actually perfected voter suppression. Another thing that a lot of people might be shocked to find out is that the KKK was started by an ex-Confederate general, no surprise there, happened to be an elected Democrat, Bedford Forrest. And between 1882 and 1964, there were 4,743 lynchings. About 3,000 or 3,446 were blacks, and 1,297 were white. So the reality is people were lynched for voting Republican in that time period. So if people want to talk about voter suppression, that's fine. Look at the history that is in the Democratic Party. It's really enlightening. And that book, I will give you a copy of it. It's an outstanding book.
Yeah, he's an excellent historian. I've read quite a bit of stuff and seen him.
Good. Well, I'll tell you what, Ed, we greatly appreciate you spending some time with us.
Thanks for
very
having me.
interesting information. I think a lot of people that are going to look at it are going to find it very interesting. And like we said, you're going to be at our May 23rd monthly meeting, and hopefully we'll have some new information for you.
We'll have some handouts. You can take voter fraud documents home with you to show your friends.
All right. Thank you, Ed. We appreciate your time. And thank you for joining us. I just want to thank everybody here at Hudson Cable TV for the help that they always give us. Jim McIntosh, Michael O'Keefe, Chris Giorgio, Scott Pearson, and Rick Lavasser are helping us out. So thank you very much, guys.